Oh, this kind of journalism is a lost art. It's a lost art, bro.
Hey, what's going on? This is Lecrae. Right now, you with hardknocktv. Yeah.
A year ago, you wrote a very powerful essay about race in America. For people who might not have read that, can you talk a little bit about what your inspiration was to write that in the first place?
Yeah. Race in America, it's a social construct, you know what I mean, that you know, creates these barriers for the haves and the have-nots, or for, you know, some people matter, some people don't matter. And I feel like a lot of people don't want to deal with it. They feel like it's too complex, too complicated. There's too many historical nuances. And so they just want to just take everything as it currently is without realizing how dangerous that is. You know what I mean? And so it's almost just kind of like, you know, if you inhaling toxic gas every day, but you're like, well, you know, I don't really smell it, you know, but you're still inhaling it. Even though you may not smell anything, it's still here. And I think that's racism in America. That's, you know, the racial constructs in America. You may not see them like as obvious as you would think, but it's still toxic and it still affects people. So for me, I just wanted to like help us walk through what those realities are and how people are affected even today.
One of our last interviews was Logic speaking on his new album, which deals with a lot of race. And I remember seeing a lot of the comments where people were like, there's no racism in America, you know, it's like, how could you even talk about this? You're just dividing us by even having this conversation. What do you tell fans who might not see the systemic racism and the prejudice that actually seeps into the rules? It's not just how people act, but it, you know, it's the rules of the system.
Yeah, I tell them to read, man. You got to read to really be able to dive, but you have to want to read. You have to want to be educated on those particular things, you know. So there's a lot of great books. I tweeted out a list of books that I felt. I tweeted like books that have helped my white friends get it, you know, and I think that's part of the issue is you just can't see it unless you walk in those shoes. Like you can't sit here and ask me, you know, what's life like in China? I don't know. I don't live in China. I don't experience the things that people experience in China. So it's ignorant for me to be like, that doesn't happen, or it's not real. It's like, well, you know, do you really have these relationships? And then, you know, you look at 95% of people on social media, their friends look just like them. You know what I mean? So it's like, when was the last time you had in-depth conversations with people of other ethnicities and races and whatever, and asked them what their day-to-day realities are like, you know? And so, so that's it's a long. The biggest thing I try to tell people is I say, man, I'm 7 conversations ahead of you. So for you to try to jump into this conversation now and expect to get it doesn't really make sense. It's like we're trying to explain calculus and you haven't been to algebra yet. So I tell people, man, like start with algebra and keep going, you know, educate yourself.
And you would call algebra the books that you tweeted out? What would you,
man, there's so many good books. I mean, you know, why are all the black kids sitting together in the cafeteria? You know, that's a good one. Shoot, man, The Miseducation of the Negro, Carter G. Woodson, that's a really great book. Man, it's Divided by Faith, there's another good one. Oh man, the list goes on and on. I had to.
That's a few. That's
Ta-Nehisi Coates' book, you know, Between the World and Me. Anyway, my brain is fried. I can't. It's a laundry list, but go check my Twitter feed for real, and see the book list that I put out there.
Speaking of your Twitter feed and kind of continuing in this path, you said there's a difference between creating division and exposing the division that's being ignored.
Yeah.
Can you speak on that a little bit?
Yeah, I think people always will criticize you when you bring up race or you bring up racism or systemic racism, and they'll criticize you and say, well, you just create more division. I'm like, no, I'm acknowledging and exposing what already exists. There's a difference. And so people will say, you know, it's like some people will tell you, you know, because you're talking about an issue that's divisive, you're being divisive. And it's like, no, I'm talking about what's really real. And it's divisive to you because, you know, you don't want to talk about it. You'd rather ignore that particular situation. And so I think it's just hard, man. It's hard, specifically like in America, because we're so cultured into it. Like we wake up and breathe it and eat it every day. So people just they can't see it. They're like, I don't get it. Where's the racism at? What are you talking about? But I mean, you go around and think of the ethnicities that run most major corporations, that are behind, you know, most of everything that's going on in America. You know, it took, you know, 45 years to get a African American president. You know what I mean? So it's just kind of like, not 45, I mean 45 presidencies or whatever. But just it's those type of things that I think people don't realize, and just they don't contemplate, you know? Like, it's different when you are the minority. So like being a black man, I'm thinking about it all the time. When, you know, if you looking for movies to go watch and you pull up, you know, your movie app to look at what movies are in the theater, like, be Asian or be Hispanic or be black and look for somebody who looks like you down that list. You're gonna see 15 movies. You're not gonna see anybody that represents your ethnicity. But if that's not your ethnicity, you're not thinking about it. You're not thinking, I'm on a plane, just flying on a plane to LA, and I'm looking at the movie. Yeah. I'm like, there's nothing with black people on here. Oh, we got one. There we go. You know what I mean? So it's like, but you don't think like that, because it's like, what's wrong with the movies that are here?
Right.
You know what I mean?
No, as Latino, that's the reason why I started Hard Knock, because I felt like growing up, I didn't really have the positive, you know, growing up with a single parent, I didn't really have what I was going through on TV. Yeah. Like, if it was Latinos, it was like, oh, he's a gangbanger, he's a vato, he's like whatever. And I was like, no, let's just create a platform where people would just be themselves and not have to fit into the, in the essay that you wrote, a word that stood out to me was humility. Speak about how humility to you kind of is one of the key things in how we can kind of hear each other out. Yeah,
I mean, you have to acknowledge that you don't know everything. You got to acknowledge that you have a lot to learn. Like, even me, I'm like, I still have a lot to learn, and I'm okay with that. And I think that posture of humility says, I'm willing to listen and learn from you, from your experience, because I'm not the expert on it. You know, you're the expert on your experience, not me. So let me be empathetic to your issues and what you're going through, and let me listen. And because we have different experiences. So it takes humility on your part to hear my experience, because yours is different than mine. So if you grew up around police officers and it was all positive experiences, it's hard for you to imagine that there could be corruption there. It's hard, just like, where? Police always have protected me. I've never seen corrupt cops. I've never seen that in my life. Well, you got to humble yourself to hear a different vantage point. You know what I mean? Like, to hear somebody say, no, I've been, you know, a victim of police brutality. And, you know, it takes humility to listen to each other's stories. And that's, you know, if we don't have that, then we just a bunch of, you know, people talking at each other, not talking to each other. I said something like, my faith is not colonized or politicized or nationalized, probably. Yeah. And I I think when people think of a Christian, they have this, like, you know, patriotic, nationalistic, red-blooded Republican, and they don't give me room to be for nuance. They don't give me room for complexity. Like, you just boxing me in, it's like the same kind of marginalization they would do to me being a black man. It's like, oh, you black, so you must, you know what I mean, like, only like these particular things, you only eat these kind of foods. And it's like, we're not a homogenous group. Like, we're complex and diverse, and we like different stuff. And so so don't do that to me, you know, as a Christian. It's like what people are fighting for in America for, you know, Muslims, is they're saying, like, why are y'all marginalizing them and making them all, you know, terrorists? And it's the same thing, like, you know, that people do to me. They'll marginalize me and say, oh, I must be like this or I must be like that. And I'm like, nah, I don't subscribe to that. Like, I don't subscribe to what I call Ameri-Christianity, which is like an American brand of faith. The apple pie, go get 'em guy faith, you know what I mean? Like, what's the dude on The Simpsons? Like, the okey diggly yokey, you know what I'm saying? Like, don't put me in that box. You know, like I don't subscribe to those particular things, and I'm not gonna, you know, it's nationalistic. I gotta vote this way, and they don't have nothing to do with each other. You know what I'm saying? Like, my country and politics, you know, are not, my faith is not contingent upon them. So that's just how you know, you gotta get to know me to know the differences in who I am and what I believe and how I get down. But if you try to just put me in a category, if you try to just be like, oh, he must fit here, like, that's crazy.
Have you felt the pushback, for example, like a Colin Kaepernick, for, you know, he made a big stance and now he can't find a job, even though he's well qualified, but there's a sector that's like, well, you're an athlete, you shouldn't speak about this, or you're a rapper, you shouldn't talk about politics. You know, there's definitely a section out there that tries to make people one dimensional. It's like, well, you're here to entertain me, but I don't want you to have a political view on this or talk about that.
I think it's hypocritical. I think it's hypocritical, especially for people to say, like, you know, you take a Colin Kaepernick, for example, and it's like, you know, you would demonize this man for, you know, acknowledging the hypocrisy in this country, and say because he's not being patriotic, that he just needs to be thrown away. And I think that's ridiculous. Like that defeats the whole purpose of, you know, freedom and liberty and justice for all. Like that's what he's asking for. You know what I mean? And we're gonna demonize him and criminalize him for taking a knee. I mean, that's crazy. When people are like murdering people in cold blood and getting off, we'll demonize a football player for taking a knee because he wants to see freedom, liberty, and justice. It's crazy to me. I'm sounding like KRS-One right now.
Cars. Spirit.